Why don't you start out? There may be a lot of people like me who have known all their lives. They should know about Joan Didion. Like I remember, here are my experiences with Joan Didion. Once in college, I was procrastinating. I was in some library, and there was a copy of her novel, Played as It Lays. And I read like the last part of it. And I think I remember it.
You read the end?
Yeah, just the end. I didn't want to procrastinate too much. And I kind of think, and maybe this is something I'm conjuring up having read your essay, but I think I remember the ending being kind of like decidedly inconclusive in a certain sense. Intentionally not resonant. You know what I mean? Like not resonant in an old-fashioned novel way.
Yeah, that's
and,
right.
And that's all I remember. And then I remember when her book, The White Album, came out, which was roughly the same year. I'm old enough to remember not only her book, The White Album, coming out, but the White Album coming out, the actual Beatles' White Album coming out, which was about 10 or 11 years before that. And I read about that in the New York Times Book Review, but I don't, I've always had her. There's this list of people like her and Susan Sontag, and I know I should know more about them. I don't. So first of all, why don't you tell us what's important about her? Is she, first of all, is it, would you say novelist slash journalist or novelist slash essayist or what?
Yeah, I mean, I would say novelist slash essayist. But she was also a journalist, but she was a journalist in the mode of what's now called the new journalism. She was not a traditional journalist. And if you want, we can talk about what that sort of means.
What does it? I think of the new journalism as meaning, for one thing, a kind of a you are there journalism that was somewhat defiant of traditional journalistic standards and maybe a little self-referential. It was legitimate to talk about the journalistic process.
Yeah. So I'm happy to sort of say a few words about it. So the new journalism, I most identify with three people: Tom Wolfe, Hunter S. Thompson, and Joan Didion. They are not the only ones. Gay Talese is another. Norman Mailer is another. Norman Mailer wrote, did work of this sort in addition to fiction. Mm-hmm. But those three are the ones who are most known for it. Probably Thompson is known for it the most. But I would
did you mention Tom Wolfe or
yes,
you did? Okay, yeah. I think of him as just synonymous. I mean, when I think of the new journalism, I think of him as kind of the paradigmatic case.
And he actually edited a book called The New Journalism that had
maybe that's
excerpts and pieces from this genre. I would characterize it in terms of two basic characteristics. The first is it eschews any pretense at journalistic objectivity. Mm-hmm. And it's not just that it eschews it because it's skeptical about it. In other words, this is a problem that that teachers have, right? So you're a professor, especially in a subject like philosophy or political science. Do you tell your students what your own views are, or do you try to hide them? And the conventional wisdom is, well, you should hide them because if you tell your views, then it's going to skew the student's perception and so on and so forth. I disagree with this. I always tell the students exactly what I think because they know that I think something. And if I try to hide it for them, it's more likely they're going to go looking for it. They may get it wrong. And they're very likely to impute things to the things I say, motives to the things I say, that may not be there. If they know what I think up front, they're perfectly capable of figuring that in when they interpret what I say, right? Mm-hmm. And the new journalist had a similar sort of attitude about journalistic objectivity. There's no such thing. We know that now, right? And why even bother to pretend that there is one, right? Instead, we'll just write out, right? I'm Hunter S. Thompson. I hate Richard Nixon. I think he's the devil, right? Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to do my reporting. And you can figure that in when you read what I write. And you can, you're not stupid. So one thing is this eschewing of the pretense of journalistic objectivity. The second is the insertion of the journalist into the narrative.
Right.
Thompson's famous piece on the Kentucky Derby, which I strongly recommend, and I'm going to provide Bob links that people can read this stuff. Most of the stuff is available. It's absolutely wonderful to read. His piece on the Kentucky Derby is really about him and Ralph Steadman going to the Kentucky Derby. It's not about the Kentucky
Ralph Steadman was the illustrator.
Was the illustrator that then was with him for years and years, and illustrated many of his books. The story really was about Thompson and Steadman at the Kentucky Derby and watching the people watching the Kentucky Derby. It really wasn't about the Kentucky Derby itself. So that's the second element that I would say is really a characteristic of the new journalism, is the insertion of the journalist into the story, to where the journalist is part of the story and may even dominate the story. To talk about Didion, if you read the essay Slouching Towards Bethlehem, or you read the essay The White Album, she is a main character. It is her meeting these various people, going through these various experiences, and describing them from her point of view.
So was the White Album the title piece of the book called The White Album? That was like an anthology?
Right. Remember, all of these books, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, The White Album, then much later, After Henry, Political Fictions, these are collections of pieces that had already been published elsewhere. Published in places like Harper's or The Atlantic or Esquire or I'm not remembering all the places, but she published in a lot of places. If you buy one of these anthologies, it'll tell you every single place that these pieces appeared in. So these are collections. But the main essay in each also bears the title of the collection. Mm-hmm. So Slouching Towards Bethlehem is the main and largest essay in that collection, and that also is the collection bears that name, and the same thing for the White Album. So anyway, so Didion, I would say, is both a novelist and an essayist in the style of the new